All right. So there you have it. Three pretty different interpretations of the allegory of the cave. Looking forward to hearing which one you all like the best and why. So let's get into it. Let's go over the basic setup first of all. Some prisoners have been trapped in an underground cave their entire lives. They're staring at a cave wall. Behind and above them is a raised walkway on which people carry statues. Behind these people and the statues, there's a fire burning. The fire casts a light on the wall in front of the prisoners, but that light is partially blocked by the statues, and so shadows are formed on the wall. The prisoners are mesmerized by the shadows, and they mistake them for actual reality. They entertain themselves and judge each other by making games based on the shadow play, competing for who can name which shadow, who can predict which one will come next, and so on. One day, a prisoner is released from the cave and gets to see the actual world for the first time. He returns to the cave to share his newfound wisdom with the cave dwellers and invites them to join him outside the cave. Unfortunately, now that he's seen the light of the truth, his eyes are not well adjusted to the darkness of the cave, and he sucks at the shadow games. He also doesn't perform well at them because now that he knows the truth, frankly, he just doesn't care about them anymore. I mean, imagine. But the cave dwellers can only judge whether something like leaving the cave is a good idea based on how it affects others. And the only means they have of judging how something has affected someone is by how well they perform at the games. And the released enlightened prisoner now sucks at the games. And so they come to the conclusion, perfectly rational, that leaving the cave is a terrible idea and refuse to do so on their own accord. This is what's crucial. They want to stay in the cave. They want to stay in their prisons. Staying in prison is for them doing what they want. Prison is what autonomy gets them. So the released prisoner, who represents the philosopher, who presumably has seen the truth, is faced with a dilemma. The prisoners will only want to leave the cave if they do, in fact, first leave the cave. But they won't leave the cave as long as they don't want to, unless they're forced. So if the philosopher honors their freedom to do what they want, their self-determination, their autonomy, he'll need to leave them in the cave. But then he knows they're not really free inside the cave. So he's respecting their freedom and leaving them in a prison. If, on the other hand, the only way they'll want to leave the cave is if they first actually do leave the cave, then their leaving the cave has to happen before they want to do so, which means they'll need to do something they don't want to do. They'll need to be forced against their will to leave the cave, painful as it is going to be. They'll need to be dragged up the rugged ascent to the light. Once they're there, the enlightened philosopher knows, or suspects, it's pretty sure, that they'll thank him. Yet this still appears to him to be such a violation of their most sacred freedom of self-determination. But leaving them there doesn't feel like honoring their freedom either. It feels like whether he leaves them or drags them out, he's violating their freedom. In essence, in this dilemma, we're faced with two competing definitions of freedom. The first freedom, or definition of freedom, autonomy, the freedom of self-determination to do what one wants, is pitted against the second notion of freedom, what we could call freedom to know the truth. If we think of all this in terms of our previous discussion of arrogance versus love, self-determination is kind of like the freedom of arrogance, the freedom to see the world solely through one's limited perspective. It's the freedom of Doug the dogmatist, totally closed to any point of view that doesn't align with his own. He's totally closed off to the world outside of the cave of his own image of who he is, and his image of how the world is as it appears to him through his eyes. And it's opposed to the freedom of love, of openness to the world outside the cave of one's own limited perspective. I think we've all felt ourselves on both sides of this divide. We've been the ones stuck in our ways and calling that freedom. And we've been the ones forcing, or at least wanting to force, someone else to open their minds. In a small example, we might sneak a new food that we know a kid's going to like into the kid's food, even though he's refusing to try it. In a more extreme case, we might think of Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, who were known to dose unsuspecting people on LSD. Many thanked them later. Many didn't. If the philosopher respects the freedom of self-determination, prisoners' freedom of self-determination, he'll leave them in the cave, sacrificing thereby their freedom to know the truth. If, alternatively, he respects their freedom to know the truth, he'll need to drag them out of the cave, violating their freedom of self-determination. To add to the difficulty, if he does drag them out of the cave, they'll resist. In Plato's words, they would even put him to death. Yet, Plato insists that it's the responsibility of the enlightened philosopher not only to violate the prisoner's freedom of self-determination, but further to risk his personal life by forcing the prisoners to see the truth, by forcing the prisoners to be free. All right. So I'm going to leave it off there. You can see the questions for discussion and the questions for the written questions for me. I look forward to seeing what you all come up with. Congratulations on getting pretty far through your first session, and I will see you on Friday or whenever you check into the next video. Okay.